welcome to Built to Adapt at SpringOne Platform 2017. My name is Ciara Byrne and I'm here with Jeff Kelly talking to technology leaders from some of the world's largest and most iconic companies, and also to practitioners and analysts, one of whom we have now. So this is Joe Fitzgerald. He's the director of Pivotal Cloud Foundry Solutions, and you're very welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
You work with a lot of customers who want to build a platform capability. So how do customers get to the stage where they realize, okay, we need a platform and we need a platform team?
Sure. Typically, it comes from one of two different scenarios. In the first scenario, there are multiple application teams, at least two, who have started to build their own platform or platform-like capabilities to solve tactical needs as they build and launch their own applications. The other scenario is you have a cross-functional team, maybe in a shared IT function, who have solved platform-like things historically and they want to offer a new capability, or are just looking to launch a new capability with a brand new team for the entire enterprise.
So one way or another, whether it's app development teams or whether it's an operations team, they're realizing they're doing the DIY work of building a platform anyway.
Right.
And doing it more than once. So they decide, okay, we put a team together for this.
Right.
I know Pivotal's approach is to treat that platform as a product, and that's maybe a bit different from the industry standard. So can you tell us a bit about what that means and how it's different from the traditional approach?
Sure. So many customers and companies in general know how to build product. That's often the very reason for existence of the company, because they have products that their customers use. So they have product managers that listen to the needs of users and launch a product that meets the needs of those users, and then listen to those users on an ongoing basis to evolve the capabilities of the product. Relatively rarely does this approach actually find its way into internal products delivered by a shared IT function. And so it's really about taking what companies already know about how to launch products and apply it to an internal product that has a brand, that gets launched, where users are identified and catered to, maybe in a way that's not the same as traditionally an IT product is delivered. Sometimes the users, like developers, are deprioritized in
comparison to external customers? In
comparison to external customers, there's the perception that there's an opportunity cost of treating an internal product in this way, because some of your best product management talent may be out generating products for the rest of the company and the actual users that the company is serving. And so I think the big realization here is when you are building a platform product, you can actually amplify what all of your different product teams can do, the speed with which they can respond to their users' demands. And so there is absolutely upside to treating an internal product in this same way.
So then you probably need to find yourself a product manager from somewhere else in the company, because an IT organization won't normally have one, right?
Yes, I mean, there are certainly product managers in IT organizations, but in general, it's a good idea to find a product manager who can empathize with the needs of your developers and weigh their needs with the needs of IT and cross-functional disciplines like security, compliance, production operations, release management, etc., so that the needs of all of those groups are prioritized evenly, as opposed to maybe unevenly in a traditional environment.
Because of course, like developers and operations may traditionally value different things and be incentivized on to different types of goals, like velocity for app developers and resilience, let's say, or availability for operations. So I know in addition to treating your platform as a product, that Pivotal advises a couple of other best practices from a couple of other areas as well when you're building your platform. So can you tell us about them?
Yes, so we talked about product management, and within the product management discipline, we very much use user-centered design. So observing users, using the product in a way that is natural to them, rather than trying to change the user behavior or train them to do things that are unnatural.
Yeah.
Finding ways to make the platform naturally let them fall into the valley of happiness instead of the pit of despair. In addition to that, we use Google's site reliability engineering practices. Site reliability engineering is what happens when you treat operations as a software engineering problem.
Okay.
And it turns out that Pivotal has a very long and storied history and experience in software engineering that uses extreme programming practices, things like test-driven development, pairing, etc. So we combine Pivotal's expertise in product management, user-centered design, with the engineering practices to build and run a platform with our customers and train a balanced platform product team that are cross-functional.
Right. Talk about that platform team, because this is a pretty radical change from the way IT typically treats some of their technology, and I imagine there's some organizational change that has to happen. You need a platform team. Talk about what that team looks like. Where do you find the members of that team? What are the different roles?
Sure. So the first key role is a platform champion. So we need someone, often at an executive CXO level, to create an environment where change is possible. Essentially changing conversations where this is why it can't be done into conversations framed around how can we make this work. In addition to that platform champion, we need a full-time product manager who's going to figure out what to build, but not how to build it. And then at least 2 platform engineers who will actually define the how it is built. They will use tools from Pivotal's portfolio, in addition to tools from the open source ecosystem and other companies, to deliver the platform capability. To identify these people, often you will find, particularly for the platform engineers, you will find these people either in the infrastructure organization or application teams, and often it's beneficial to combine those 2 audiences in a single cross-functional team. You want to identify people who naturally are automators. So if you give something repetitive to a person in an infrastructure organization and you find they naturally create a tool or a script that automates away that repetitive activity, that's a great person to bring into the platform team. Similarly, an application developer who, when they reach some kind of impasse in getting code to production or launching a new application, will find that they keep going down the stack until the problem is solved. Finding someone who is curious and doesn't say, that's not my job, that's an infrastructure thing, that sounds maybe scary. That's a good person from the application team to bring in. And then in the middle, you'll often find that there are organizations that are doing systems automation with tools like Chef, Puppet, Salt, Ansible, etc. And finding someone who spends all day automating the deployment of systems or the release of applications onto deployed systems is another good source of talent for a platform engineer.
And how do they get started? What are some of the first steps you take once you've identified the team, you've brought them together, you're starting to talk about this new approach? What are some best practices to actually start implementing this?
So what we found, a lot of companies fall into the trap of build it and they will come. They build a big, wide, non-production infrastructure and a big wide production infrastructure, and they don't have many or any identified workloads to run on it, and then they wonder why aren't people using the product that they've just spent the last 6 to 12 months deploying. We found that starting with a very thin sliver of infrastructure that gets people to production, and starting with one application and an application team that are willing to go to production on top of the platform, is the best way to start. Now, obviously, the group as a whole need a mandate to implement a new path to production, and so that can be challenging. When you say, I'm holding an application, I want to get to production, there are a lot of conversations that come out of the woodworks that don't happen until you say, I'm going to production. Things like security, production operations, capacity management type conversations along the path to production. So having that initial production application and the development team associated with the application working with a platform team ultimately leads you to having a production infrastructure that works for one application. So you have a user base, and that opens up the question, how do I actually make this applicable to more applications in the application portfolio? That's where you want to use progressive elaboration, an evolutionary architecture to ask users. You have your product manager go and talk to users, maybe in another line of business, or maybe users of applications that have more complex requirements in their path to production, understand their needs, add that to the platform, and then get those applications on the platform. Do that incrementally over time, so that you know that you're building something that is actually useful to your end users, rather than something that you think might be useful, but you don't know until this big bang launch after some large amount of expenditure of time and effort.
And does it matter what this first application is? Or like we've talked to customers yesterday, for example, who like Comcast, who chose very high value applications as the first one that went to production. What's your advice on that?
Yes, and I worked with Comcast on that particular project, so it's good to hear that you were chatting to them. I think you certainly don't want to pick a Hello World application. You want to pick an application that has actual users, because you then allow an application team to increase their velocity of change for those users and be more responsive to those users. It can be a bit risky, though, to take the most impactful application, or the application where all of your revenue
Depends on
flows,
yep.
and make that your first application. It's not to say that it's not possible, but generally, in kind of a risk averse way, you might want to first test the waters with a less strategic application, and then progressively elaborate to the point where you actually have a super important application running on the platform. And in fact, Comcast did do that. In a multi-phased way prior to launching their biggest, baddest application.
What about the path to production? Because we have another interview with T-Mobile later on today, and they had like 72 steps, I think, in their release process, and it took 6-7 months. So what kind of new path to production are you trying to create? And how do you know which of those steps you can leave out, or you can simplify, or whatever?
Sure. It can be tempting to try and insert a new platform into an existing path to production. And it can also be quite helpful to start with a completely naive path to production that works for one application, and then add to that path to production as you expand the number of applications in the app portfolio that are suitable for the platform. We found, and in fact some of our customers have found, that when they started with the incrementally changing the existing path to production, they've hit this roadblock where there are too many people asking, well, that's not the way things are done around here. And by going to the naive path to production, they get to use a technique called 5 whys, where you try and unpack the real reason why the existing path to production exists in the way it does.
Because of course it's been built up over a long period of time as well.
Right, like what is it really trying to achieve? And do I need to solve for the lowest common denominator in the entire application portfolio? Or if we focus on 60% of the application portfolio, is there a win that drastically increases velocity for the application portfolio? Now, I think as you go through this process, it's important to acknowledge that the path to production as it exists today is there for good reason. Good people made decisions
for good reasons at the time.
For good reasons to solve real actual problems in their path to production. So it's not about discarding that good work or the good intent behind that, but really about questioning the implementation of that process and asking, is there a more efficient way to do this, and a way to continuously improve over time. And that's where the contrasting approaches of incrementally modifying the existing path to production versus implementing a naive path to production that becomes less naive over time and more applicable to the application portfolio as a whole they're both interesting tools.
And I assume the platform champion is also pretty important in that whole process of defining that new path to production.
Yes. Sometimes people struggle with change, even when it's good change. And having a platform champion create an environment where it's okay to question how things are done, and there's a blameless environment to try different ways, experiment, spike on new approaches, validate, did this work, did it not? Double down on things that work and go in a different direction for things that don't work is super important to actually changing the path to production.
Makes sense.
And we don't have a lot more time, but I'm wondering, could you maybe talk about a couple of customers you've worked with that have done this well, and maybe share some experiences there and maybe best practices or lessons learned?
Sure. I think Home Depot was a particularly good example. They went through this evolution of trying to incrementally modify the path to production, and then flipped a switch and went to a brand new path to production. They have now had significant portions of their application portfolio move onto the platform. It's helping them achieve faster velocity to production, and they're getting a ton of benefit out of it. In fact, we learned from them, and I think that's one of the most interesting parts about what we do is, Pivotal doesn't have all the answers, and we really have a very strong learning culture. So what we've done over the course of the last 3.5 years is we've helped customers launch production platform capabilities, is both help customers and listen to customers, and then share those stories of customers that succeed, and also share stories of approaches that we've seen fail consistently across our customers.
Those lessons are just as important.
Indeed.
All right, so thank you very much, Joe, and thank you to everyone for watching.